dedicated to empowering you with information
to make positive choices
and be advocates for your overall well-being.
Welcome to The Health View.
Welcome to The Health View. I'm Yvonne Dunitz, and today's topic is about sex trafficking in the state of New Hampshire. And my guests today are Mike Posanka, who is the resident agent in charge for Homeland Security Investigation, HSI, in Manchester, New Hampshire. Among other areas, HSI is a lead federal agency for human trafficking, child exploitation, and narcotics investigations nationwide. HSI Manchester is responsible for investigating these cases throughout New Hampshire. After graduating from St. Anselm College, Mike started his federal law enforcement career in 1997 as an agent with the Immigration and Naturalization Services in San Francisco, California. Mike served for 3 years at HSI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and then for 3 years as the group supervisor over child exploitation, intellectual property, and gangs in Boston, Massachusetts. He has served as the RAC of Manchester, New Hampshire since February 2014 and brings subject matter expertise to our panel as a result of his insight into the prevalence of human trafficking in New Hampshire, as well as applicable federal criminal laws. Also joining him today is Donna Plord. She is the executive director at Real Life Giving, a nonprofit anti-trafficking organization advocating for women and youth being exploited by the commercial sex industry in New Hampshire. A certified trainer with the Faith Alliance Against Slavery and Trafficking, she is presented at workshops and conferences providing training to social service and healthcare providers, as well as awareness and prevention events for community and civic groups, youth organizations, churches, and schools. As a member of the New Hampshire Human Trafficking Task Force, Donna serves on the Community Outreach and Training Committee, and she is also a member of the New Hampshire Traffic-Free Coalition. Welcome to our program. I'm delighted to have both of you with us today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Yvonne.
For having us, Yvonne.
So Donna, tell us a little bit about Real Life Giving, its purpose, its mission, and what you're doing.
Real Life Giving is a nonprofit that started about 4 years ago. And what we're doing is primarily reaching out to the community in various ways, whether that be professional settings such as the healthcare and social service providers, but also to the community members themselves, whether that's organizations or individuals, civic groups, to bring awareness and training primarily, but also we do prevention efforts and community engagement. We've found that awareness and training are absolutely key if we're going to see forward motion in the state and have those services that are so well needed expanded, and that people recognize that there's indeed an issue going on. Because when we do any type of presentation, workshop, for that matter, sometimes we do community film screenings with panels. Mike has joined us before. When we do those types of things, many times there are still people in the audience that will say, "But that doesn't happen here." And so, again, we believe that awareness and training are one of the places where we definitely need to start. And what we do, I think the most key thing to bring to that, to begin with, really is, what is the definition? What is human trafficking? And human trafficking, this would be a simplified definition, so to speak, but it is when an individual is compelled to perform a commercial sex act or provide labor or a service through force, fraud, or coercion for the benefit of someone else. And that commercial sex act can be something like prostitution, which we would probably associate with sex trafficking, certainly, but also it includes stripping, and it can include pornography, webcams, things along those lines. As far as providing a labor or service, or what we call forced labor or labor trafficking, that can include domestic servitude, for example. It can include individuals who are working in the construction industry, in hospitality industry, agriculture, lots of various ways. Both aspects are quite hidden but pervasive, and absolutely both are going on in the state. Today our focus will be on sex trafficking and what we're seeing, because that's primarily the focus that we have, but we want to make sure that the audience absolutely knows that labor trafficking is important, and they are absolutely seeing cases in New Hampshire, and it's happening all over the country domestically. Both are.
Mike, in your role, what are you seeing from your perspective in these areas?
Well, as Donna mentioned, we're seeing a prevalence of sex trafficking occurring in New Hampshire, where heroin addiction, and it's a nasty byproduct of the opiate epidemic here in the state, where heroin addiction is being used by the trafficker, by the pimp, to coerce the sex worker into prostitution.
And the extent that we're seeing compared to other states, and here in New Hampshire, how do we compare to other states?
Well, I think the heroin epidemic is being felt region-wide.
Yes.
I understand it's being the impact on New Hampshire is probably greater than other states for a variety of reasons. But no, this sort of sex trafficking is occurring throughout the region.
And what are the signs and symptoms? How do we help people to know what to be aware of related to this and what they should do?
I think it's important to know that there are vulnerable populations, certainly. Age being one. Not that you have to be young, but certainly the young are vulnerable just because of their age. Having abuse in their background, that can happen. There are also situations where there may be connections to the foster care system or child protective services. But ultimately, what's really important is to know that any person could be at risk. That can be through addiction issues, family background situations, what's been normalized in their own environments, perhaps. And then again, there are other things that we need to keep in mind as far as wanting to recognize that it's not just a specific gender, for example. It can be, it certainly is women, but it also can be men and boys, as well as young girls. It can be the LGBTQ community is involved, is targeted many times, I should say, as can be individuals with disabilities. And so I think that Mike could absolutely speak to some of this too. When we mention that there's force, fraud, and coercion, force, when I think of force, and I think this is a natural assumption, it's more of a physical type of situation. It can involve beatings and any type of physical violence, really. It can be abduction. That's not doesn't happen as often. It can be restraints. Fraud is more of a deceptive type of thing, where someone might be thinking that they're coming for a job in a certain area, perhaps to work in the hospitality industry, and then they're deceived into and trafficked from there. But it can involve someone, I think, pretending to be someone that they're not, and playing into someone's insecurities and fears. And then there's also coercion, and drugs are definitely one of the main things that we see in coercion. And that can also be psychological threats. But I was hoping that Mike might be able to share a little bit more about what you see from some of the trafficking situations. I know that, again, drugs being probably the main one.
Yeah, we're seeing combinations of those three elements: force, fraud, and coercion in a lot of our cases. I mean, as Donna mentioned, the force, we know what force is. We're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing the traffickers holding guns to the side of the head of one of the sex workers within their stable. We're seeing brutal beatings should the sex worker, want to get out of the life. But we're also seeing some elements of fraud. As Donna said, particularly in our labor trafficking cases, we're seeing foreign nationals coming over to the country, perhaps with the idea that they're going to get married to the trafficker. They think the traffickers bring them over for love, and when they get here, they'll get married and they'll get their immigration status, checked. They'll get permanent residency, which leads to citizenship. Only when they come here, they're put into a domestic servitude type of situation, and they're not allowed to leave their house. They have certain elements of control where their passports are taken away. So that's often where we see fraud come into a lot of this, and coercion. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of coercion through opiate addiction, but we're also seeing coercion through, a lot of our youth are participating in sexting, right? They're sending texts to each other of a graphic nature, and those images can be used against the individual who sent
To bribe them.
to bribe them, to compel them into
Blackmail.
blackmail, into commercial sex.
What about homelessness? Does that in a way affect people when they don't have homes and bring them
Absolutely.
into this situation?
Poverty and homelessness are absolutely factors that lead to increased vulnerability, no question. And there are times when the exploitation is going on that's not perhaps trafficking in the classical sense that we're talking about at the moment, but is something that might be referred to as survival sex, where there are individuals who are at a place where there are no options in their mind or in their actuality. What would be the opportunities that they have to be able to support themselves because of different factors from their background, perhaps, that have led them to that circumstance? So and there are those that are very much willing to exploit that type of vulnerability.
And that vulnerability that is going on, is it happening in certain areas? Like what about our hotels and different situations like that? Are these type of activities going on in the New Hampshire hotels encouraging this to happen?
Well, I think you're touching on a couple different issues there. Is it occurring in hotels? Well, yes, I'm certain it is happening in hotels. Often it's not. It's happening in the labor trafficking sense, in that contract, let's say, room cleaners are brought in to clean a hotel. So it might not be that the hotel is knowingly, engaging in human trafficking to clean their hotel rooms, but it might be happening by a subcontractor who's providing the labor to clean the hotel room. That there's been instances around the region where that is occurring, and in terms of there's sex trafficking going on at the hotels as well. I mean, that's where the sex workers are and their pimps are advertising their services.
So what is being done to counteract that? Do the hotel administration people know about what's going on? Are they working with, your agency and the law enforcement to help break this down and to get help for these people? What is happening?
Well, Donna and I work within a multidisciplinary work group in the state, and we're involving a lot of different industries. Donna, I would say, is from the faith-based group. I lead up the law enforcement group. Within my group, I got to plug them for a minute here.
Yeah.
We work very closely with the
Yes.
Nashua Police Department right here in Nashua.
Yes.
The Manchester Police Department most certainly is very much a strong partner of ours, as is the New Hampshire State Police, the Hampton Police, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. I could go on.
Well, that's
we
important.
have very strong partnerships
Excellent.
throughout the state. Within our multidisciplinary group, we also have a legal team, and the legal team is responsible for identifying ways that we can put our victims into, set them straight, make them whole again. Whether that's through obtaining immigration benefits for a foreign national who might be here illegally, or there's mechanisms within the New Hampshire law where a victim can sue their trafficker, and our legal aspect of the group would take care of that. We work with the medical field. The medical field, we've Donna and I have been doing a considerable amount of outreach to inform hospital staff here in Nashua, in Manchester, and really throughout the state. This is what human trafficking looks like in New Hampshire. We want to treat heroin addiction, and on top of that, we want to treat any psychological issues that arise out of the trafficking as well. Have I hit all the branches? Is there anyone?
Service providers, social service providers that are.
Of course, social service providers. I knew that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Donna.
Yeah.
Social service providers. We're working, particularly Child and
Yes.
Family Services is
Surely.
a statewide organization that'll help us manage the victim services for the victim of human trafficking.
So what are types of things that you're advising them to look for, to be aware of? Are you talking about what's coming through their emergency rooms, what to be aware of, and then where they should gain access for supports and services for these people? Or
Yes,
in what ways?
both.
Okay.
So in terms of indicators of human trafficking, I
Right.
classify indicators of human trafficking as behavioral.
Okay.
A victim of human trafficking is always going to look to his or her trafficker for advice on how to answer a question. So if a medical professional is asking, do you have pain urinating? Well, she's going to look to the trafficker
Versus to tell the truth.
for telling the truth, because the trafficker is exhibiting a considerable amount of control over their life. So the victim has to look to the truth. I want to make sure I'm following your rules. The trafficker has told her the rules. You're not allowed to talk to anybody. You have to go through me to talk to somebody. So the victim's always doing this. So we're pointing out behavioral
What else?
indicators like that. Environmental indicators like, and this would be more in line for law enforcement training, just poverty, because that's a big vulnerability that traffickers will seek to exploit. Dilapidated living conditions, where there's a mattress on the ground because, again, a trafficker wants to dehumanize the victim. So the victim will often be made to sleep in a ratty old mattress in the corner of a room, and he keeps control over, that trafficker keeps control over the victim that way.
I think one of the things to remember too, indicators will vary depending on who you're speaking to. Obviously, in a healthcare setting, there are certain things that they would look for physically related to their health.
Right.
And in the community, there are going to be different things that we might see as a neighbor or at our workplace, for example.
Talk about
things
some
like
of those
that.
things as a neighbor, what people might be seeing or in a workplace.
Well, I think as a neighbor or as a parent,
Yes.
to be noticing certain things that are going on with the youth that's the first thing that would occur to me.
Okay, what should we be looking for?
Some of those things can be changes in behavior. Now, some of these are going to apply to a lot of different things that
Of
could be
course.
happening, of course. But changes in behavior, a new set of friends, for example, people that are very into a different, maybe more a partying lifestyle, extravagant amounts of money seeming to be spent, maybe a situation where they didn't in the past but now have expensive handbags or clothing that they didn't have before, an older controlling boyfriend, someone who's, because when we look at a teenager who's in their mid-teens, 15, 16 years old, to have someone who's 24 as their boyfriend, that shouldn't be happening. So, and as Mike said, it's a very controlling situation. As a matter of fact, just to one scenario that we saw recently, actually related to us, I should say, in a hospital setting, was someone who had come in because of a drug situation, but she, instead of being concerned primarily with what was going on with her physically, she was very, very attached to her phone and very, very worried that it was losing its charge, because she knew that she needs to pick that up when he calls. And it was just, there was even someone that came in the room and sat with her who said that this individual said he was her husband, but there was no affection or even really communication. The nurse that related this story to us actually said, I got the impression, even before I knew what you were presenting today, that he was there to watch her. Mm. And it's true. It's like Mike said, it's a lot of control going on. But back to, there could be a drug situation as far as youth in our neighborhoods or our families as well. And one thing I'd like to say about drugs too is many times there's a conception that, well, they're engaging in certain behavior because they have a drug habit. That could be the case, but what's the underlying cause to that? What led them to perhaps have a drug or substance use situation going on that may, again, contribute to their vulnerability and ease of exploitation? But there's also scenarios where the trafficker can use that as a means of coercion and can even introduce a drug addiction, because they know that's a powerful form of control. I know just how much to give you, and you need to come back with a certain amount of money before you're going to get what you want. Or there are times also, and this could be also a combination of factors, where it's the way that someone copes with what's going on in their life. That can happen as well, absolutely.
So you talked about the ages. What's the youngest age that this can affect? Up to how old? You said it's a broad.
I think the New Hampshire State Police has seen a case where, I I don't remember how old the victim was, but she was very young, preteen, maybe.
Preteen.
Yeah, and that was a case where the child's mother was, or parents, both parents, were advertising their child for commercial sex on Craigslist.
Oh my goodness. So what is being done for education of the teachers and the guidance counselors and the staff and the nurses within the schools to help them to be the eyes and ears to see if any of this may be going on, and then getting these people help?
We have done some training in schools or with staff, but that is a huge need. And again, I value the fact that you're having us here today, Yvonne, because I'm hoping that there will be people even in your audience today that are listening and would recognize that, this is information that we need to get to our youth so that they're able to protect themselves.
Absolutely.
We have a friend, a colleague, who did, she works for DCYF, and they did I don't want to really call it a training per se, I guess you would say a presentation or a workshop with at-risk youth that they work with. And it was the tactics of a trafficker, how to recognize that. And at the end of the presentation, they could submit on cards questions or comments that they had. And this was up in the Manchester area. And one of the cards came back, and all it said was, Econolodge, Econolodge, Econolodge. Because they knew that it absolutely is happening in the hotels, as Mike was mentioning earlier. A very, very common scenario is for someone to be advertised online, whether it would be Craigslist or today it's even more popular to be on Backpage.com. And then there's a cell phone number that's put out there, and that's how the arrangements are made. And they're there for maybe a few days, maybe a little bit longer, but it makes it very difficult for law enforcement to follow up, because by the time they get wind, many times they've been moved too. That can happen. They're on circuits. And it's a very, very well organized, it's extremely lucrative enterprise. It's the fastest growing and second largest criminal enterprise in the world today. There are estimates anywhere from 21 million to approximately 36 million, depending on which organization you're following. We don't like to get into statistics too much. There are reasons that they can be difficult to come by, and they can vary depending on the model used as in collection, for example. But those are estimates worldwide. But they do know that in 2009, the International Labor Organization estimated that it was a $32 billion industry. In 2014, they now estimate it's a $150 billion industry. That includes labor as well as sex trafficking.
So Mike, what do we do? What do we do to put an end to this, or seriously help the community to work with you to help deal with this?
Well, I think it's important to continue the education pieces, particularly, as you mentioned, to parents and teachers. We work very closely with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, the ICAC. And along with the ICAC, we'll often go around to schools and present on safe online habits. Now, that message might not be particular to human trafficking, but these things intermingle. I mentioned sextortion type of schemes just a little bit earlier. We most certainly touch on those type of issues.
Are there specific internet things that you'd like to tell us and our audience now for them to be aware of?
Well, I think parents need to make judgments for themselves on when. We'll often get a question, how old should my son be before I allow him to have a cell phone? I can't answer that. I think that depends on the parent. It depends on the maturity level of the child. The child has to be old enough where you can trust him or her to have Facebook or Instagram and to use it responsibly. The child needs to know the dangers of sharing too much information on those social media sites.
What other important information should we share with our audience now to give them an alert on things that they should be looking out for and being aware of with their children, with their students, in any way? What can we advise them now?
I do want to touch on what Mike just shared as far as internet safety is huge, because that, when you factor that in, every youth is vulnerable.
Yes.
And there are predators out there that know very well what they're doing. And it's very easily, a young person could be very easily manipulated into doing something that may may expose them, unfortunately, to a situation where they're now going to be blackmailed because of sexting is so predominant, or so it's just happening everywhere now. And that being said, I think recognizing that young people need to know that you don't know for sure who you're talking to. Too often, it's almost anyone that's allowed in, that type of thing. It seems flattering when people want to friend you and get to know you, and they're very, very good at what they're doing. They can look at, I remember being at one of the presentations that ICAC did, the Internet Crimes Against Children, and we can look at someone's Facebook page, for example, and discern certain things. And they'll look at that and go, yes, but, and they can show you things that, this is what I see when I look at this, and what a predator knows. And some of the very, very simple example, for example, many times so much information is shared, and you can very easily see that someone has had an argument with their parents and is very upset with them for whatever reasons, and tend to rant about that. Well, that's something that could be manipulated. No, they don't understand you here. I'm listening, and that type of, you can see where that could be an in, or perhaps they've broken up with their girlfriend or boyfriend. Same thing. That's that loneliness and things that can be absolutely used for a predator's.
That's a vulnerability, and we're talking vulnerabilities being exploited,
Right.
because that's what traffickers do. They seek that vulnerability, and an irresponsible post on Facebook might just highlight, like Donna said, well, if you have some attachment problems with your parents, you're not getting along with your parents, the trafficker is going to go in and exploit that, and maybe figuratively take the place of the parent, right? And thereby gain control over the victim.
In relationship to New Hampshire, there are some cases that you can talk a little bit about to help our audience know what's happened. I believe the Kaplan Clark.
Yeah, sure. So those there are three main cases, and these are each sex trafficking cases in New Hampshire that we've over the past year, and I hesitate to say three. There's actually been six. Multiple defendants in these cases, so more than one in each, but six cases statewide where we've had good convictions in the last year. We had a child sex trafficking case involving a missing 15-year-old from Dorchester who was brought up to a Salem, New Hampshire hotel and was offered up for commercial sex out of that hotel. We got a call from the Boston Police Department. We engaged with the Salem Police Department, and we went and made a date with the victim off of Backpage.com. We knocked on her door, and she opened it. We arrested, I believe it was 3 traffickers at the time, a gun, a lot of money, and some cocaine at the time. That case ended up with 4 traffickers being convicted in federal court earlier on in 2016. Kaplan and Clark are 2 cases that we prosecuted along with the Manchester Police Department. The Hillsborough County Attorney's Office prosecuted those 2 cases. Kaplan, they both involved coercion through heroin addiction, but also force. And just to the point of the vulnerabilities that a trafficker will seek to exploit, Kaplan drove around town in a limousine. And one day he parked his car outside of a drug treatment facility in Manchester, and he waited for a certain woman to come out, and he targeted her and offered her heroin, and started the exploitation of this woman that way. Clark was more of a force type of a sex trafficking case. He was just a brutal. He created an environment of fear within his stable. I think that's the second time I've used that term, but that's the term. Well, within his crew of sex workers, he created an environment of fear where he would beat up one of his sex workers in order to send a message to another one. If you get out of line, if you don't follow my rules, this is the treatment that you're going to get, right? And then we've had the Portsmouth Police Department earlier on this year successfully prosecuted man with the last name of Florimon. That was another sex trafficking through heroin addiction coercion case. And the New Hampshire State Police investigated with the Merrimack County Attorney's Office. They prosecuted a child sex trafficking case that I mentioned, the Shine family.
So where can people go to get help related to this? If they're literally trapped in this type of situation, where can they go to get help for themselves?
Well, do you want to? There's still networks being put in place in the state, but I think if someone, for example, in our organization, as we're out doing community engagement or doing a training event or awareness, we would, if someone comes to us and knows someone, which has happened before, that they feel that they need help, if that person is ready to receive that many times is going to be the situation that you need to wait for. Because of all the issues that are going on, the case for the taken scenario or some type of dramatic rescue is not always what will happen. Many times it's that person being ready to come out. At that point, what I would do in my situation is call my colleagues, whether it be service providers or Mike, and because they would then know be able to assess what is needed. Do they need medical detox and rehab before they need safe housing? So Mike, why don't you share what you would recommend?
Yeah, for the general public, I'd recommend that they call their local police department. Local police departments are getting trained in human trafficking. Particularly Nashua, Manchester, all the cities I've already mentioned. They have units. They have investigators that are dedicated to investigating these crimes. At the national level, there's a non-law enforcement tip line because oftentimes victims of human trafficking don't want to talk to the police, and that's okay. Our primary concern, not only as law enforcement, but as our working group in the whole, is to treat the victim, right? Is to right the victim situation. So I don't have to involve law enforcement. We're okay with that. So the Polaris Project is has set up a national hotline to take intake of human trafficking complaints.
So is that for victims to call or anybody who suspects a victim that is going on? What number would they call?
888-373-7888.
Again?
888-3737 is actually how we usually say it, 888-3737-888.
And what is the information that is asked of them then when they call? Will they immediately get help, and is it a 24/7 line?
It is 24/7.
Okay.
It's out of Washington, run by Polaris, as Mike said, but they know who in every single state they can then connect with. They can assess what the need may be through the conversation. You can call in anonymously if you're giving a tip,
right,
or you're just not sure, because sometimes we're not sure what we're seeing, but boy, something seems off.
Okay.
And as Mike says, and it seems like a cliche sometimes, we all say it though, see something, say something. As we get awareness out and we start to recognize these indicators, what do I do if I see a scenario like that? Well, they are a good resource. Absolutely. They can help walk you through it. And if you want to remain anonymous, you absolutely can. But they know who to reach out to in each state, including, of course, New Hampshire. Okay. And then we'll get those people contacted.
And Polaris is what type of agency?
It's a non-government agency.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the number again is?
888-3737-888.
And that's for anyone, a victim or someone who suspects that someone is a victim, to gain confidential help immediately. It's open 24/7 and they can reach out there and someone will be able to help them.
And you can also text help, the word help, to Be Free. The numbers for Be Free. It's easy to remember that way.
B-E or just B?
B-E.
Yep.
And then free. Yep.
Help to be free. Okay.
And that's the same hotline.
That's the same hotline. And that's a texting information. All right. Any other ways that people can get help?
Yeah, my agency runs a tip line that anyone can call to provide information on.
And that's through Homeland Security?
That's through Homeland Security. It's 866-DHS, Department of Homeland Security, to ICE, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Again, please.
1-866-DHS to ICE.
And what will happen when they pick up the phone and they call that number?
They'll speak to an operator who will take down the particulars of of what the caller has observed, and then we'll then farm that information. If it pertains to New Hampshire, it'll go to me. And Polaris is much the same way. If the caller says they don't want law enforcement involved, then I won't get the information. But if they said, yeah, share this information with law enforcement, and it pertains to New Hampshire, it'll come to me and some other law enforcement officials, the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI here in New Hampshire.
So is there communication across state lines? Because one of the things you were talking about is people move back and forth. Do you communicate in states? So if somebody was started out in New Hampshire and might end up in Massachusetts, or Massachusetts, New Hampshire, or any of the states, is there an integrative communication that is working together to try to help these individuals?
Oh, well, that would be, are you talking about, say, for example, groups that are offering aftercare, or, say, the law enforcement community? In aftercare, I can say that they do, actually working with law enforcement many times, collaborate on what's available. Right now, we don't have any safe housing or beds dedicated to human trafficking survivors in New Hampshire.
And why is that?
Well, recognizing that there's a need and then funding, there are a couple of groups working towards that end, and I think that's coming. But right now, absolutely knowing that there are other options in the area, though they're still limited. Right now in all of New England, there are only 17 beds that are dedicated beds for a human trafficking survivor. Now, there are other options and shelters that can help with an individual that's come out.
Let's talk to the audience about those options, because it's important for people to know that if they call, that there actually will be people that will help them, just not hear them, but get them to the resources they need.
Do you
Well,
want to share
certain social services agencies, like right here in Nashua, the Bridges,
Okay, yeah.
does a ton of work in human trafficking.
Absolutely.
Statewide Child and Family Services is an organization that I mentioned earlier. They're certainly, willing to come in and provide their expertise.
So you're saying that through these numbers, people will call and they will be routed to the appropriate agencies and support systems that will help them.
And if there's a need for a detox situation, which there often is, knowing that Mike has helped facilitate really across the state, set up those programs at the hospitals that he mentioned earlier is huge, because we've heard law enforcement say many times that the first thing, I remember one of our colleagues on the task force saying that sometimes they'll see the same individuals a few times and they do offer assistance, but very often the first thing that they say is, I don't want to be sick, because being dope sick is something that they just do not want to go there. And to know that there are actually programs available and a spot that they can go in, such as Elliott or other programs that are being developed, is huge and a necessary component, absolutely.
So as you've been going to the different hospitals, have they welcomed you in the want to work with you to help service this population that is in such need?
Yeah, most definitely. The hospitals throughout New Hampshire that we've visited, they're very keen on their duty to treat their communities, right? So in Manchester, we would go to the Elliott Hospital. They've provided fantastic services for victims of human trafficking, from 5-day detox. Because before we can send a victim or a survivor of human trafficking onto a longer-term human trafficking specific treatment program, where the victim can really get her life back together and build certain social skills that they need to survive in a healthy way in society, they first need to be detoxed. So that's what we're seeking from the hospitals right away. And then there's, along with those, as I mentioned, there's the psychological treatments as well. So here in New Hampshire, Southern New Hampshire Medical Center has really stepped to the plate. St. Joe's here in Nashua has really stepped up. Lake Region Medical Center in Laconia has really stepped up as well.
Common misconceptions.
Well, that it's gender, as we talked about earlier, that it's only women, and that's absolutely not the case. It can certainly vary in ages. Also, I think many times they think it's international. Hopefully after today's program, they're certainly getting a better view of what's going on right here domestically in the United States and specifically in New Hampshire. But there's still, if people have heard of trafficking at all, many times they still think of it as Southeast Asia or India.
Yeah, Donna mentioned the Taken movie, and that's really how people have, constructed their views of what human trafficking looks like.
Right.
And that is an American woman who was kidnapped and brought over to Eastern Europe by an Eastern European crime syndicate and held in captivity over there. We don't need all those elements. Donna mentioned the elements of human trafficking, and there's nothing in there about transportation. There's nothing in there about shackles. The shackles are the coercion, are the control, the psychological control that a trafficker exhibits over the victim. Other misconceptions, and along the same lines, human smuggling is a crime that my agency investigates. We always have, along with human trafficking. But human trafficking is a crime against civil liberties, against human rights, whereas human smuggling is a crime against our border. It's bringing a foreign national into the United States illegally. So where there's consent on the human smuggling side, on human trafficking, the trafficker has overcome his victim's ability to consent.
What is the greatest challenge with this whole issue that you face in order to
Drug
turn
addiction.
it around? Drug addiction.
Drug addiction. The control that the drugs, never mind the trafficker has over the victim, is what is the element of coercion. I'll explain myself. Donna mentioned that the victim is very scared of going into dope sickness. Yeah, that's a strong psychological or physiological effect of opiate addiction, and they've become suicidal facing that, and so they view the police as getting in the way of their status quo. They have to wake up in the morning as a drug addict. They wake up in the morning, and their sole goal is to seek that opium, that heroin high, and they look to law enforcement as someone who's going to get in the way of that. So we have to overcome that, and we can't always do that because of the fear that the victim has of facing withdrawal.
Another misconception that I think is important too is, or I don't know if it's misconception exactly, but that tactic I'd like to talk about a little bit more about coercion. For young people, the power of that psychological threat against their family, for example. I know a survivor who the main threat for her that kept her as long as it did in trafficking was the fact that they knew exactly where her family lived. She saw them follow in a car, her brothers walking home from school. Things along those lines. It was a very real threat. They had pictures of her, and they threatened to show her father. And even though her father, of course, any of us who are parents recognize that we would want our children to tell us if they were being threatened. But when you're that young and you're thinking that your dad is going to see these pictures, it's a powerful tool. So there's that, but there can also be the psychological situation where they literally think that this person loves them. Many times traffickers take time and are very, very good at manipulating. Mike and I have talked about this before too. There are pimp guides that you can buy online on how to do this, and they actually
Definitely have a playbook.
Yeah, they have a playbook, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because you can make so much money. That's part of it. And when you think about it too, when you sell drugs, you have to procure more to sell them again. With a human being, you can sell that person over and over again. So it is incredibly lucrative and a fairly low risk still, unfortunately. But those tactics, when someone is literally providing the only shelter that you have, because maybe you've left home for very good reasons too, that might not be an option. Sometimes, of course, people want to be reunited with their family, but that's not always the case. And so if this person has shown you some affection, is providing you at least a place to stay, even though they're abusive at different times or they're forcing you into activities that you would never have considered for yourself, it's still a powerful deterrent because there's those cycles of intense affection and then abuse. and it really keeps you emotionally in a state of instability. So that's a powerful tactic. But I did want to add, too, when we're talking about a commercial sex act as far as sex trafficking,
Yes.
you do have to have force, fraud, or coercion, but only if that individual is 18 and older. If they're a minor, you do not have to prove that because they can't consent to sex. According to the federal laws, you have to, if you're under 18, it is considered trafficking.
And the state law.
And the state law.
New Hampshire's right there.
And so again, what do people do what are the things that they should be aware of and look for to be able to report and get help for somebody that may need it, but may in fact be a victim? So we're talking about educators, we're talking about parents, we're talking about community members. What are the things that they need to be aware of and then report it? And to who do they report it to?
They need to be aware of if there's a suspicious actor in the person's life who seems to be exhibiting an undue amount of control over the individual. That's something to be reported.
And a tactic where many times they'll try to isolate them intentionally from their family and friends because they're the ones, it can seem kind of flattering when someone wants you all to themselves or, oh, your family doesn't understand you, but I do, that type of thing. But if he can, or she, because I don't want to stereotype, traffickers can be females as well, but if they can get you away from anyone, family or friends, that are going to recognize there's something wrong with this picture. So isolation is definitely a tactic too. If you see them becoming more and more withdrawn from the friends that they used to hang out with or less involved in their family activities, things along those lines, money that kind of inexplicable, like we mentioned before, certain purchases that really can't be explained, that type of thing. Dramatic changes in behavior. The older controlling boyfriend is definitely something to be looking for.
What about physical changes? Makeup, way they dress.
It can be. I mean, you may not see that while the child is still in your neighborhood or in your home per se. That could be happening. They may hide that. And one of the people that I was talking about, the survivor, I knew that they were threatening her family. She was living at home the whole time she was trafficked because she was literally, again, tied to her phone. And when that rang, she had to go out. But it was in the middle of the night. Her parents never knew she was leaving. So they didn't know until a few years later when she disclosed what had happened to her. The only reason in her case that it stopped is because the family moved. Because that was such a powerful deterrent or threat in her life. So that could definitely be, I mean, if we're seeing that out, someone's not dressed, perhaps it's provocative, but it also could be inadequate clothing for the weather, the season. Right. That type of thing, that could be an indicator as well.
Okay, and there are hotline numbers people can call if they are aware of anyone that may in fact be a victim or victims themselves.
Right.
And that number is through an organization that you mentioned called Polaris?
Polaris Project, right?
Polaris Project. And that project is dedicated to what? It's a nonprofit organization?
It's a nonprofit. It's a non-government organization.
Okay.
And they run the national hotline for human trafficking.
Okay. And so that number is?
That's 888-3737, 888.
Okay. And then other resources available for people?
They can also text help to the number Be Free.
Help.
And that also reaches
Be Free.
That also reaches the Polaris Project.
Okay.
And then they can call their local police departments because local police departments are getting trained up to recognize human trafficking.
And what are the types of information that they need to share?
They need to share the victim's name, the victim's location, why they believe that this individual might be a victim of human trafficking, whether that be labor trafficking or sex trafficking, right? This could be information concerning a domestic help, a maid or a housekeeper at a neighbor, something if they notice something suspicious going on there. The location of the activity.
Anything else?
I think it's really important for the community to know what they can do also.
What can they do?
It's a dark subject.
Yes.
And it's not always easy to listen to all these stories. But we're so grateful, again, Yvonne, today to be here, to be able to have a chance to raise awareness to your audience. And I think, as Mike said, recognizing and then reporting is number one. Absolutely. We can't do anything to make a difference without having those. So I would say continue to learn. You know, if this is, there are options online. We actually, reallifegiving.org, we have a page where it says learn, and there's recommended reading, for example, and films.
Can you think of something right now that you could recommend to the audience to read as well as to watch, a film?
Yes, I would say there's a couple of very good books that come right to the top of my head. One is Walking Prey, Prey.
Okay.
And then also Girls Like Us, which is a book written by Rachel Lloyd, who works with GEMS, which is Girls Education and Mentoring Services in New York City.
Okay.
As far as a film, A Path Appears does have an episode called Sex Trafficking in America, and it actually features a case that involves New Hampshire. So parts of it, there's a tie-in to that. But there, it talks about different groups, 3 different groups across the country: Thistle Farms in Nashville, Sheriff Tom Dart's office in Chicago, and then My Life, My Choice in Boston. But beyond that, some of the things that, because many times when we do an event, many times people, well, what can I do?
Right.
Well, definitely educate yourself. Absolutely. Take advantage of training opportunities. Follow different groups on social media. For example, Polaris, follow them. International Justice Mission, Shared Hope. You can follow Real Life Giving if you'd like on Facebook. The reason I would mention that is because when what we post are links to informative articles, but also any events that might be going on, including training opportunities. St. Joseph just hosted a conference in November. As a matter of fact, it was very well attended. Mike and I were on a panel together at that, but there was a Dr. Hani Stocklosa from Boston, from Brigham and Women's, who came and talked about the intersection of the substance use and human trafficking and what they're seeing in their area, as well as a number of other topics that were covered. It was great. So getting that information is important. But then, again, what can we do? Well, we can volunteer, definitely. Along the prevention lines, all of the youth organizations, I would say, that I've ever talked to, I really can say that without reservation, are in need for volunteers and mentors. So if you are willing to work with a youth, you may be able to prevent a potential statistic for that, or so many other things that youth are vulnerable to. But you can also donate your professional services. We've had a young woman who's worked for us before that designed flyers for an event we were doing. She's a graphic designer, and it was great. We appreciate that so much. Perhaps you can donate legal services that you may, maybe there's one case that you can take on pro bono, that type of idea.
Because as we mentioned, there's a lot of legal avenues for that a victim of human trafficking might face, whether that's getting social services, social benefits, to suing a victim, to seeking restitution, to seeking immigration status. There's a whole variety of legal avenues to take. If I could plug another book, our friend Jasmine Marino is a local survivor out of the North Shore of Massachusetts. She often comes up to New Hampshire and does presentations along with us. She's publishing a book in the near future, I think early in the new year. I believe it's called The Diary of Jasmine Grace. Okay. Jasmine, while being trafficked, she kept a diary of her experience, at the time. So she's turned around and she runs her own ministry down on the North Shore, and she's publishing a book. So that's going to be an excellent resource.
It will be. She takes a piece from the journal and then ties it in with a contemporary reflection from where she is now, looking back on what that was like for her at the time.
What was it that helped to get her help? How did she seek and get out of the situation she was in?
Yeah, that's her story, and I would really hesitate to speak for her.
Was there any particular agency or group that helped her?
I will say in her case, it wasn't really an agency or group, it was individuals. There was, for example, one of the people that helped in Jasmine's life was a woman who helped her get her real estate license so that she had a way to support herself. Are there ways, are there groups within our own community groups, civic organizations, churches, are there people that might be able to offer an internship or help someone get some type of job training? That's huge. That's another huge need, because you don't necessarily have a resume, you don't have the job skills, and if you don't have a way to support yourself beyond an entry-level job, what's the future going to look like? So if there are opportunities along those lines, once someone has come to a place where they've gone through perhaps some type of safe housing circumstance where they've had a chance to heal and just move forward in their life, and they're in a place where they're ready for that. But that was instrumental in Jasmine's life at that time. She now is a well-known speaker and advocate, certainly a survivor leader in New England. But for a while, that is how she supported herself.
So this is very helpful. So what you're saying is if you have certain skills, professional background, and interest to be able to be a mentor, that there are social service agencies out there that would welcome your support and volunteerism to help people that are victims get the help that they're needing. So as we completely summarize very quickly, people who are victims or think that they have any symptoms that they've seen or have witnessed anything, they can call what number in case of an emergency to report it again, please?
The Polaris number, which is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, is 888-3737-888.
Okay, and the number through you?
Well, my agency's number is 1-866-DHS-2ICE. But in a true emergency situation, I would recommend that they call the local police, call 911. And if there's anything, if you would, a final message that I'd like to get out to your audience is that we're in a very good position in New Hampshire. We're working together as a multidisciplinary group. Is it happening in New Hampshire? Yes, it's absolutely happening. The epidemic in New Hampshire is not sex trafficking. It's there's an opiate epidemic. That's the root problem from what we're discussing today. Sex trafficking happens. We're addressing it, and we're in a very good place. So I don't want to get people overly excited about, oh my God, it's happening everywhere. It's happening here. Not every sex worker is a human trafficking victim, and not everybody who is advertised on Backpage or a service like Backpage is a human trafficking victim.
And so that the addressing of the opiate crisis, in also working with you related to the sex trafficking and human trafficking, everybody's working together, collaborating together in helping to meet the needs and to help this problem get
One
better.
of the things, too, will always be even donating to an organization or supplies for outreach to the community, or there are backpacks that we've given Mike's organization and other groups.
I thank you so much for coming. This has been very informative. We wish you a great day. Thank you. Take care.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.